Hamilton was disqualified, Stroll stepped up, and Sargent scored this weekend in Austin. So I asked you for your hottest takes from the 2023 American Grand Prix, and there were more sparks than on the Mercedes plank. Ches said it's sad that fans booed Max on the podium. And I agree, it was sad, especially considering it was his 50th win in Formula 1, getting ever closer to being the third most decorated driver in Formula 1 history, which is ridiculous. But, I mean, when you dominate like this, you are going to get your haters, and I don't think Max will really take it to heart. It was quite a bumpy weekend for Max, though, no pun intended. I mean, both qualifying sessions saw adventures off the track. Okay, qualifying on Friday, it was just by a tiny little bit, but on Saturday, a full pirouette for Max Verstappen, and he wasn't happy with the balance in the race at all either. But the raised ride height of the Red Bull actually meant that they didn't get disqualified and still won both races. So Max again delivering when it counts, and unfortunate that the fans didn't really appreciate that. Chris said, cheaters got. This, of course, referring to the fact that the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc were found to be in breach of Article 3.5.9 in that the plank underneath the Formula 1 car wasn't a minimum thickness of 9mm due to the wear that it received over the course of the Grand Prix. And the plank was actually introduced in 1994 at the German Grand Prix after a couple of really terrible incidents just beforehand, meaning they wanted to raise the ride height of these Formula 1 cars. But what I'm really getting at is it's been in the rulebook for a very, very long time, and it's something that really shouldn't happen in that we see modern day Formula 1 cars get disqualified because of this, given the level of preparation that goes into setting up these cars every single weekend, and the amount of money that Mercedes and Ferrari have effectively thrown away this weekend because they didn't meet this minimum requirement. Of course, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc lose out on the points as well in the driver's standings. However, there was no argument from anybody involved. It's a very hard and fast rule, and not really one you can get around. Sally says, why wasn't George Russell's car checked? And I thought this was a really good question, so I had a little look into it, and basically the FIA conducts extensive legality checks post-race on lots of different cars, but it's impractical for them to check absolutely everything on every single car every weekend. It would just be way too much work. So they chose 4 cars for this floor and plank wear inspection in Austin, and they opted for 1 from each of the top 4 teams. So actually, the bottom 6 teams, none of those cars got checked for the wear on their plank. Leclerc and Hamilton are obviously the 2 that were in breach of the regulations for Mercedes and Ferrari, but I thought it was interesting that Lando Norris and Max Verstappen also had their cars checked, and they were absolutely fine. So the McLarens and Red Bulls seem to be okay. However, it does pose the question though, if one car from the team fails, surely the other should be compared, because George Russell and Carlos Sainz are running the same hardware, but there's nothing in the FIA regulations that allows them to go back in and double check George Russell or Carlos Sainz's car. So you can either see it as George Russell and Carlos Sainz getting really lucky that they weren't picked, or Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc getting very unlucky and being disqualified, losing out on all of those points. Winception says Lewis actually had a chance of winning if Mercedes' terrible pit stops didn't make him lose so much track position. I feel like you've got a point. Lewis Hamilton felt like he was absolutely at his best once again this weekend, getting every single ounce of pace out of that Mercedes car. Okay, Max Verstappen by the end was just slightly out of reach. Hamilton needed maybe 2 or 3 more laps to really reel in Max Verstappen and possibly step onto the top step of the podium for the first time since 2021. Of course, he would still have been disqualified, but it would have been nice to see the Mercedes on the top step of the podium in 2023. I mean, he did need that tyre advantage at the end, so if Mercedes hadn't pushed in that long on the first stint, would he have still had such a big tyre advantage at the end? It's difficult to say. It does feel like Mercedes did leave him out a little bit too long on that first stint though. However, there are lots of positives to take from this weekend. Hamilton was by far the fastest driver on track for many different stints of that race, and the Mercedes upgrade seemed to work and is a huge step forward again to closing that gap to Red Bull for 2024. A name you can't remember says Ferrari is actively sabotaging Leclerc. And I mean, Charles Leclerc did have a terrible time on Sunday, even before his disqualification from the race. He started on pole position. The Ferrari has looked really good recently, and it felt like Leclerc was ready to battle with Verstappen, Hamilton, Norris, and possibly be in the fight for the win. Then within the first stint, he drops back to 4th place, and it's like, okay, maybe he's outside of the realms of possibility for a win, but he's definitely in for a podium. Then Ferrari put him on the worst strategy that I've seen in ages. He loses out to his teammate in Carlos Sainz. He loses out to Sergio Perez. He finishes 24 seconds off Max Verstappen in the end. And Charles Leclerc should have been in the podium discussion. And instead, he has to see Carlos Sainz take home another trophy and and win in Singapore just a couple of races ago, whilst Leclerc then gets disqualified. He will definitely be having chats with Ferrari this week, and they're not going to be positive chats. Throwing in a hot take of my own, Pierre Gasly deserved driver of the weekend. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for Lando Norris getting driver of the day. He led laps in a McLaren and he drove really well. But Gasly, he even said this was the best weekend of the year so far for him, and I couldn't agree more. He and Alpine did exceptionally well. They picked up points in the sprint race and then even more points on Sunday, and actually made both points finishes look fairly comfortable, which is really hard when Mercedes are looking quicker, Ferrari are looking quicker, McLaren are looking quicker. Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin is still in and around the point scoring positions all the time, but overall, he did everything that he could have done to make that machinery look as good as possible. And he had the edge on his teammate Esteban Ocon, who again missed out on points because of a collision with Oscar Piastri. So now Pierre Gasly is looking really good in the championship. He moves up into the top 10 in the standings. And if he can finish in the top half of the drivers, that is a real statement for Pierre Gasly. Wessie says Stroll was amazing in the race. And I have to agree with this. I mean, it was far from Aston Martin's best weekend of 2023, but I think it was easily Lance Stroll's best weekend of the second half of the season. He's been pretty woeful since the summer break. However, in Austin, he really did turn up. He finished ahead of Fernando Alonso in the sprint race, then was just a few seconds behind his teammate until he retired in the Grand Prix, had to start from the pit lane, so he really had to work for it, and Stroll put himself in that position by making some really neat moves. I'm thinking of that move around Daniel Ricciardo at turn 12. There was another overtake on Logan Sargent down towards turn 12 as well. So that points finish wouldn't have been possible without Lance Stroll putting in a really solid execution. Another quick one from me. Yuki Tsunoda is still the best driver at AlphaTauri. Yeah, I know Liam Lawson was good and Daniel Ricciardo is back, blah, blah, blah. But Yuki Tsunoda deserves his respect this weekend. Tsunoda got the absolute maximum out of that AlphaTauri car. He didn't get caught up with the Alfa Romeos and the Hasses and the Williamses battling behind him. And Daniel Ricciardo obviously went for that weird Leclerc strategy, which didn't work. But Yuki Tsunoda was so good. And then AlphaTauri being bold enough and brave enough to trust Yuki Tsunoda to go for that fastest lap. Even if it did give Yuki Tsunoda a little bit of a heart attack, he did secure that extra point. And points opportunities are really difficult to reach for all of those teams at the bottom of the Constructors' Championship, but Yuki Tsunoda this season has been so much better than the championship standings make him look. Nathan says, Sargent drove a great race today. He made his way through the back markers and was only one position off Albon. And I think the words great race are quite important in that sentence because the rest of the weekend was quite tough. And as much as I would love to chuck praise at Logan Sargent, he struggled in both qualifying sessions and in the sprint race and looked fairly destined to run around at the back all by himself until he came alive on Sunday, where he put in a good race. Not going to say great race, a good race, which picked him up his first Formula 1 points, and he was only 6 seconds off Alex Albon, which dropped to 1 second because Albon had a 5-second penalty. So give him his dues. Sunday is where it matters, and Sunday is where he turned up. Dane says, since Logan Sargent got his first points in COTA, can he do it again in Las Vegas? And I think Dane is right to ask this question because it's 1 points performance on a poor weekend for Logan Sargent, and that still doesn't feel like enough to really save his Formula 1 seat for 2024. I mean, Las Vegas is another opportunity where the Williams is going to be really quick, and I think Williams will be looking for Logan Sargent at his 3rd home Grand Prix of the season to put in a bit more of a complete performance, like put in a really good qualifying session and turn that qualifying session into a good race, maybe pick up some more points, although that will be really tricky with lots of teams fighting for those points positions now. Otherwise, Mick Schumacher seems to be looming. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, I put together this video here on the records that Max Verstappen is even closer to breaking in 2023 now. So click that link, and I'll see you over there.